Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Trends channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The room was thick with silence, the kind that only comes after words too sharp to take back have been spoken. Kyle's eyes burned with betrayal. And though Claire had always been able to read him like a book, this time his gaze was unreadable, as if he had locked away every tender part of himself behind a wall she would never breach again. For weeks, their relationship had teetered on the edge of something fragile, like a vase perched precariously on a shelf, but neither had wanted to admit how close they were to shattering. Claire had made choices she thought she could justify, decisions she told herself were rooted in survival, but the truth was harsher, and when Kyle learned the extent of her deception, the fragile illusion of trust disintegrated. She reached for him, whispering his name as if the sound alone could draw him back, but his jaw tightened, his chest heaved, and in one unthinkable motion, his hand struck across her face. The crack echoed in the room, a final punctuation on everything left unsaid. Claire staggered back, her cheek burning, her heart tearing into pieces she wasn't sure she could ever collect again. The three words that followed cut deeper than the slap itself. They were not whispered in regret, nor spoken with hesitation, but hurled with the finality of a gavel striking in a courtroom. "We're done, Claire." 3 words, simple and cruel, the kind that could carve scars invisible to the world yet lasting a lifetime. For a moment, she stared at him, unable to process that the man who once swore to protect her from every pain had just become the source of her greatest heartbreak. She opened her mouth to plead, to explain, but the air was stolen from her lungs by the enormity of what had just happened. Kyle turned away, his shoulders tense, his body rigid as if he feared that even looking at her again would weaken his resolve. Claire's hand rose to her cheek instinctively, not from the sting of the slap, but from the way it seemed to echo through her soul. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about the breaking of something sacred, the destruction of trust that had taken so long to build. She wanted to scream that he didn't understand, that the choices she made were never meant to hurt him, that she had believed she was doing what was best. But excuses rang hollow when the evidence of betrayal stared back at him from every angle. He had given her everything, his love, his loyalty, his belief that she was different from the others who had disappointed him. And she had squandered it in one reckless moment. The weight of his anger pressed on her like chains, making it hard to breathe. Kyle walked toward the door, each step deliberate, each movement carrying the finality of a man who had already made his choice. Claire wanted to chase him, to throw herself into his arms, to beg him to remember the laughter they once shared, the nights spent tangled in whispered promises. But her body wouldn't move. She stood frozen, her heart shattering silently as she realized that there was no magic word, no desperate plea that could undo the damage. The slap was not just physical, it was symbolic, a severing of ties that went deeper than words. And yet, beneath the anger in his eyes, she caught a flicker of pain, as though hurting her had hurt him too, as though the man who once loved her so fiercely still lingered inside the storm of his rage. When the door finally closed behind him, Claire collapsed onto the couch, her tears spilling freely. She replayed every moment of their relationship in her mind, each memory now tainted by the bitter taste of betrayal. She thought of the first time Kyle touched her hand, the way his thumb brushed against her skin so gently it felt like a promise. She thought of the nights when he held her close, whispering dreams of a future where they could finally outrun the shadows of their pasts. She thought of how safe she once felt in his presence, as though nothing in the world could touch her as long as he was near. And now all of that was gone, obliterated in an instant, leaving her with nothing but the echo of his words. She whispered his name into the empty room, her voice cracking. She told herself she didn't deserve this, that she had acted out of desperation, but deep down, she knew the truth. She had betrayed his trust, and in doing so, she had betrayed herself as well. Love, she realized, was not just about passion and intimacy. It was about loyalty, honesty, and the quiet promises that wove 2 lives together. And once broken, those threads were nearly impossible to repair. The price of betrayal was steep, and she was only beginning to understand just how much it would cost her. The night outside seemed to mirror the storm inside her heart. Rain pelted against the windows, streaking down in chaotic lines that blurred the world beyond. as if even nature had chosen to mourn alongside her. Claire sat motionless, her fingers trembling against her lap, her breath shallow and uneven. She wanted to scream, to break every fragile object in the room just to release the torrent of emotions tearing her apart. But instead, she sat in silence, listening to the thunder rumble. Each clap like a cruel reminder of the violence that had just taken place. She closed her eyes and saw his face, twisted with anger, and she wondered if there would ever come a day when that image would fade, replaced again by the tenderness she once knew. Kyle, meanwhile, drove aimlessly through the slick streets, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the deluge. His hands clenched the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, but no matter how hard he tried to focus on the road, his mind kept circling back to Claire. He could still see her eyes, wide with shock, brimming with unshed tears, the way she staggered back when his hand connected with her face. The memory made his stomach churn, because no matter how furious he was, no matter how betrayed he felt, striking her was not who he was. He had sworn long ago never to let his anger turn physical, never to cross that line, and yet in the heat of the moment, he had failed himself as much as he had failed her. The guilt clawed at him, but he pushed it down, telling himself that she had left him no choice, that her lies had forced his hand. Still, the echo of that slap haunted him, gnawing at his soul in a way that words alone never could. Back at the apartment, Claire eventually rose from the couch, her body moving as though weighed down by chains. She stumbled toward the mirror, needing to see what he had done, what they had become. Her reflection stared back at her with hollow eyes. A faint red mark blooming on her cheek, a physical reminder of the fracture in their love. She touched it gently, not out of vanity but because it felt surreal, like proof that the moment had really happened. Tears blurred her vision, and she whispered his name again, softer this time, as if saying it gently might summon the version of him who used to look at her with nothing but devotion. But all she saw staring back was a stranger. She pressed her palm against the glass, as though she could push through and reach the girl she used to be before betrayal consumed her. The hours passed slowly, the night dragging on without mercy. Claire thought about calling him, desperate to hear his voice, even if only to be rejected again. She picked up her phone, scrolled through their messages, the ones filled with laughter, heart emojis, and midnight confessions. Each word mocked her now, a reminder of promises broken and trust shattered. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but she forced herself to stop. If he wanted to be done, then she wouldn't beg. Not tonight, not when her dignity was already hanging by a thread. She tossed the phone aside and curled up on the bed, clutching his pillow, inhaling the faint scent of him as if it could stitch the pieces of her heart back together. Sleep never came. Only restless thoughts of what she had lost, and what she feared could never be regained. Kyle eventually pulled his car to a stop near the park where they had shared their first kiss. He hadn't intended to go there, but somehow his heart had driven him to the place where everything once felt pure. He sat in the driver's seat, staring at the bench beneath the oak tree, remembering how she had laughed nervously that night, her hands fidgeting until he reached out and stilled them with his own. He remembered the way she had whispered his name when his lips touched hers, as if she couldn't quite believe the moment was real. For the first time since leaving her apartment, his anger faltered, replaced by an aching sorrow. He buried his face in his hands, torn between the fury of betrayal and the undeniable love that still throbbed inside him like a wound refusing to heal. The 3 words he had spoken, "We're done, Claire," replayed in his mind, and he wondered if he had truly meant them, or if they were just the desperate cry of a man too hurt to see clearly. By morning, both of them were shells of themselves, broken and raw. Claire sat at the table with a cup of untouched coffee, staring at the steam until it faded, as if watching her hope evaporate into nothing. Kyle returned to his apartment, collapsing onto his couch without even removing his shoes, his body heavy with exhaustion, his mind haunted by everything he had lost. Neither knew what the day would bring, only that the distance between them had grown into a chasm too wide to cross with simple apologies. The price of betrayal had been paid, and the debt was far from settled. The morning light crept through the curtains like an uninvited guest, cold and unfeeling, casting pale shadows across the room where Claire sat slumped in her chair. Her coffee had long since gone cold, the bitter scent filling the silence, but she couldn't bring herself to take even a sip. Her hands trembled in her lap, not from the chill of the morning, but from the aftershocks of everything that had unraveled the night before. She replayed every second in her mind, searching for some point where she could have stopped the downward spiral, some moment where honesty could have bridged the gap between them before lies carved it wide open. But no matter how hard she tried to rewrite the past, the ending was always the same. His hand across her cheek, his voice breaking with finality as he spat those 3 words. She whispered them aloud now, testing how they sounded in the empty room. "We're done, Claire." And they stung just as deeply as when he first said them. She stood slowly, her body heavy with exhaustion, and walked to the window. Outside, the world moved on without her. People hurried down the street, umbrellas tucked under their arms, briefcases swinging, faces lit by the glow of morning. It struck her how cruel it was that life kept going, indifferent to the devastation inside her chest. To the world, she was just another woman behind glass, a shadow among shadows, but inside she felt like a ghost, her existence stripped of color. She pressed her forehead against the cool pain, closing her eyes, and for a fleeting second, she imagined Kyle standing behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his lips brushing the top of her head as he whispered that they would get through anything as long as they had each other. The vision was so vivid she gasped, spinning around, only to find herself alone once again. Kyle awoke on his couch with a start, his neck stiff from the awkward angle, his mind still clouded with unrest. For a moment he thought it had been a dream, that the argument, the betrayal, the slap had all been a twisted fabrication of his subconscious. But the emptiness of his apartment reminded him it was real. The silence was too sharp, too unnatural, because usually Claire's presence filled the space with life. He reached for his phone on instinct, wanting to see her name flash across the screen, wanting some sign that she was willing to fight for them, but it remained dark and lifeless. He told himself he didn't care, that he wouldn't answer even if she called, but the ache in his chest betrayed him. He had ended things because he felt he had no choice, but endings didn't erase love overnight, and his heart still throbbed with the memory of her. He dragged himself into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, trying to wash away the bitterness that clung to him. His reflection in the microwave door startled him. His face was hardened, eyes sunken with fatigue, a stranger staring back at him. He thought of his father, of the mistakes men in his family had made before him, and a sickening realization hit him. He had become what he promised himself he never would. His hand, the one that struck Claire, felt heavy, tainted. No matter how much he justified it in his head, no matter how angry he had been, the truth was undeniable. He had crossed a line. And though Claire's betrayal had cut him deeply, the guilt of his own actions now bled into him, poisoning whatever strength he thought he had left. Claire dressed mechanically, pulling on jeans and a sweater, though she barely felt the fabric against her skin. She needed air, needed to step outside before the walls of the apartment crushed her entirely. She slipped on her shoes and left without looking back, as if leaving the apartment behind might mean leaving the memories inside it. The cool morning breeze kissed her swollen cheek, and she pulled her hair forward to hide the mark. She walked without purpose, her steps carrying her through familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. Every corner reminded her of Kyle, where they had grabbed late-night takeout, where they had laughed at a street performer, where they had kissed under the soft glow of a lamppost. Each memory stabbed at her, a cruel reminder that the love they built was now nothing but ashes. She found herself at the park without realizing it, her feet carrying her there as if on instinct. The sight of the oak tree, the bench beneath it, made her chest constrict. She sat down slowly, tracing her fingers along the worn wood, remembering the nervous way she had giggled when Kyle kissed her for the first time. That night had been filled with promises unspoken yet understood. A quiet vow that no matter what storms came, they would weather them together. And now, here she was, sitting alone in the very place where it had all begun, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. A tear slid down her cheek, falling onto the bench, a silent testament to the weight of everything she had lost. Unbeknownst to her, Kyle's car had pulled into the park just minutes earlier. He had come seeking solace, hoping the memories of their happier days might offer clarity, though he wasn't sure if clarity was what he truly wanted. When he saw her sitting there, shoulders hunched, hair hiding her face, his breath caught. Part of him wanted to turn the car around and flee before she noticed him, but another part ached to run to her, to pull her into his arms, to confess that despite everything, his love for her had not died. He sat frozen behind the wheel, torn between anger and longing, between the betrayal that had wounded him and the love that refused to let go. He clenched his jaw, gripping the steering wheel as if it could anchor him in his indecision, but deep down he knew he couldn't avoid her forever. Their lives were too entangled, their hearts too entwined, for them to simply walk away without scars. And so he sat there, staring at her from a distance, the woman who had both broken his heart and held it captive. The silence between them stretched across the park, thick and unyielding, but even in that silence something lingered, a connection neither betrayal nor anger could sever entirely. Whether it was love, pain, or some dangerous mixture of both, neither of them could yet name it. But they both knew one truth. The price of betrayal was still being paid, and the debt between them was far from settled. The park was too quiet, every sound magnified against the weight of everything unsaid. Claire sat on the bench, her shoulders slouched, her fingers tracing the grooves in the wood as though the texture itself could steady her spiraling thoughts. She didn't know Kyle was watching her from the car, didn't sense the way his heart clenched every time her hair fell across her face, or the way his guilt gnawed at him for leaving her in pieces. She only knew the hollow ache inside her, the loneliness that had swallowed her whole since the moment he walked out. She whispered his name softly, not because she expected him to answer, but because it reminded her of what it once felt like to belong to someone so completely. Kyle's grip on the steering wheel tightened until it hurt. He could almost hear her voice from the distance, the faint movement of her lips forming his name. For a moment, he imagined stepping out of the car, crossing the grass, kneeling in front of her and telling her he couldn't live with the silence between them. He imagined her looking up at him with those tear-filled eyes, and despite everything, pulling him close because love had always outweighed their flaws. But when reality surged back, so did his pride, so did the sharp reminder of the betrayal that had cut him open. The part of him that longed to heal collided with the part of him that demanded justice for the lies she had told. And so he stayed frozen, caught between two impossible choices. Claire finally stood, pulling her sweater tighter around her, the breeze cool against her cheek where his slap had left its mark. She tilted her head toward the sky, blinking at the weak sunlight pushing through the clouds, and tried to convince herself that she was strong enough to move on, that maybe love wasn't meant to last forever, that maybe some wounds were too deep to ever truly heal. But as she walked away from the bench, a small, traitorous part of her heart whispered that Kyle still loved her, that despite his anger, despite his words, he couldn't simply erase what they shared. It was this fragile hope that both tormented and sustained her, pulling her forward when her body only wanted to collapse. Kyle watched her leave, his chest constricting as she walked further from the tree, further from the memories that tied them together. Something inside him broke at the sight, and before he could stop himself, he pushed the car door open. The slam echoed in the quiet park, and Claire froze, her body stiffening at the sound. Slowly she turned, and when her eyes met his across the distance, it was as if the world itself paused. Neither of them moved, neither spoke, but in that silence, 1,000 emotions surged. Pain, regret, longing, fear. Kyle's throat tightened, his mouth dry, because for the first time since last night he was face to face with the woman who had both ruined him and made him whole. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, each one heavy with the weight of everything that still lingered between them. Claire didn't run, didn't turn away. She stood rooted, waiting, her heart hammering so loudly she swore it might shatter her ribs. When he finally reached her, he stopped just short of touching her, the space between them electric. His eyes flicked to her cheek, still faintly marked, and guilt stabbed through him sharper than any blade. He wanted to apologize, to fall to his knees and beg forgiveness, but the words tangled in his throat. Instead he whispered her name, and she shivered at the sound. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice raw. Just one word, but it carried every ounce of his confusion, his heartbreak, his fury. Claire swallowed hard, her eyes blurring with tears as she tried to explain, but the truth was messy, complicated, and filled with choices that sounded weak when spoken aloud. She confessed her reasons in a trembling voice, words spilling out about fear, about mistakes, about how she thought she was protecting them, but ended up destroying everything instead. Her voice cracked halfway through, and she pressed her hand against her mouth, ashamed of the pain written across his face. Kyle closed his eyes, as though her explanation was both too much and not enough. He wanted to believe her, wanted to erase the lies and cling to the love that still pulsed so fiercely between them. But betrayal wasn't something easily forgiven, and his heart was a battlefield of contradictions. He opened his eyes and stared at her, torn between pulling her into his arms and walking away for good. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," he admitted, his voice shaking, and the honesty of the words cut Claire deeper than the slap had. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't blame you," she whispered. "But I still love you, Kyle. I always will." Her voice cracked on the last words, and for a moment he almost broke, almost let the dam of his anger collapse under the flood of love he still felt. He lifted his hand as though to touch her face, to wipe away her tears, but at the last second, he stopped himself. His fingers hovered inches from her skin, trembling, before he let them fall back to his side. The silence between them was unbearable, a chasm neither knew how to cross. Kyle turned slightly, his body angled toward leaving, and Claire's breath hitched, knowing that if he walked away again, this time it would truly be the end. She wanted to beg,